In this video, I'll be explaining the getDatabaseTitle function. Essentially, what this function is supposed to do is it's going to basically, given a title inside this, which we'll probably get from either a button click or the user entering the search bar, is we're going to search the database for it and essentially return a URL for it. So, this function may not look the same, but the function will remain the functionality of the function will remain the same. I may refactor it and change the formatting, but the basic idea behind it won't change. So when you call check database title, let's scroll up to where the function definition begins, you'll notice it's an asynchronous function. And what this means in JavaScript is that basically our function is gonna, when we call this function, we're gonna wait for it to finish, and then we're going to get the result back and continue with the rest of our program. Now, the fact that this function is asynchronous isn't too important. It only needs to be asynchronous because the function side of it is asynchronous. Now, the reason why we need it to be asynchronous is because in Java, if you have this function before, let's say a function right after it, it'll completely, if this wasn't finished in time, it'll skip it and just go to the next one. So by saying asynchronous, you're saying, hold on, JavaScript, I want you to wait for this thing to return its result, and then you can proceed with whatever else you were planning to do. So that's all the asynchronous means. And you'll see an await keyword sometimes we use, or a dot then. All that means is like, once you're done with this, then do that. Anyway, so mild rant out of the way. Let's continue with what it does. So inside the check database function, you'll see an asynchronous function called getDatabase IMDB URL. So what you're going to notice, we're going to start off with a very, did I change something? Let's not do that. You're going to start off with the SQL command, and what you're going to do in the SQL command is you're going to basically, first, you're going to see if there is a URL for the IMDb. We've already done this query before. The user has already searched it, so it's already in the database, and there are a few. So you're saying, and our entity is our title name. So if the entity matches the title, then we can return the URL. So what this thing does, we do another query where we pass in our string. And then this is the result, and this is error. So whatever the database does, it'll return these two things. So if you get an error, we'll throw an error. And basically, if there isn't a URL in the database, what it's going to do is it's going to say, well, it's going to return empty objects. We're going to check if the length of that is not equal to 0. Then we know we don't have, this movie title doesn't exist in our database. However, if the movie title is in the database, then what we're going to do is we're going to check if the URL actually exists. So this is if it returns nothing, and this is if it doesn't exist in the database, and this is if we don't have a URL. So that means we got to build one. So what we're going to do is this is just an error message, a testing message. We'll delete this in the final product, but just for now we're keeping it. So what we're going to do is we're going to create the URL. So we're going to call create URL. So let's go to that type definition. So in create URL, we pass in the title of it, and we're going to make a call to the IMDB API. So we're going to create a string. So we're going to search via the title. That's what that means. We always need this at the very beginning. Pass in the name, and we make a variable, the API key, which we need in order to use the IMDB API database, and then we just build the URL and then return it. So let's go back and find our code, which is down here apparently. All right, so we got our URL, and now we're going to make a request to the IMDb API. So let's go to that. Oh, sorry, I didn't build that function, sorry. So this is the Axios call, I believe. So yeah, it's the Axios call, so you're gonna pass in the URL, and we're going to make that call to the database, and we've done Axios calls for the IMDb when I explained in the other videos. Same thing, and we're just going to log the results. And then we're going, based on the results of this IMDb call, we're going to update our database. So what we're going to do is, all the extra information I said, I add extra columns so we get extra points. We're going to update all of these. So this call will return all of these. So let's do result.runtime. That's the thing it returns. Result.imdb. Update all of them and log it. And then again, this can be deleted in the final product. It's just a testing message. So I'm going to label this just a testing message. So much time I got. Okay, we're good. let's see. So then after that, once we finish that, we're going to return title, and then, because you want to keep this title consistent throughout the whole entire, all of our calls. So remember I said we're doing asynchronous call? Well, that's going to come into play here because we're going to then, once we've updated the database, because remember, these are asynchronous. We wait for the database to finish updating. When I didn't have this dot then, it would update it. It wouldn't update it in time, and then this would just go anyway. So I added the dot then here. And we're taking the title that we originally passed in. And then, now what we're going to do is, did I do something? Okay, we're good. Okay, so now we're going to search the, we're now going to work on creating the IMDB ID. So what we're going to do is we're now going to search for the IMDB ID, which we just updated here. And once we find it, we're going to start creating a URL based off it. So we're going to take the IMDB we find inside the database, which is going to be stored here. And then we're going to create this IMDB URL, which if we go to this type definition, we see we have the start, the IMDB database, and we put this is going to go at the very end of our thing, so we'll put, and then we'll put our middle, which is, remember, it's the ID we pass, so this will basically be this string, and then slash, and then like the ID, so like TT70595 or something, and then slash, and that'll be the full string. And this just prints it. This is just a testing message. We'll delete this in the final product since we don't actually need it. And we're going to return that. And let's see where I am. So that'll return the IMDB URL. And as you can see, I printed out once I get it out of here. And then lastly, we're going to update the database. So we're going to update it. So now we have the IMDB URL. If we ever do a request like this again, and we're going to match it based on the IMDB. The nice thing about matching it based on the IMDB ID is that any entity that shared that, remember we updated all the entities that shared that same name or category. So that means all of them are going to have the same link to the IMDB URL. So you could update basically 30 things at once, which honestly I didn't know when I made this, which is actually really convenient. So happy coincidence there. Anyway, so I updated the URL, and what we do next is we then say we updated it and we log the result so that we could return the result if we wanted to, and that means we're done. And yeah, now that whole big mess I just explained was the first part of if the IMDb URL did not exist in the database. So that's provided that, you know, we have to make it on the fly in order to link to it and all that fun stuff. But instead, let's just say it did exist. We'd already queried this before, and we actually had already used that movie. Instead, we're going to say, oh, this is just a testing message again. So we're going to say, oh, it's not null, and we actually have a valid URL. So what we're going to do is we're just going to build the URL again. So, oh, never mind. We're not going to build it. Here we have it. You're going to set it equal to result IMDb URL. You notice the 0. Your result data, since it's a whole entire object, since it's an array. So in this case, I'm saying just take the first element of that array and pass there. Honestly, you could probably just do result.imdb URL. Just ignore the .0. It's okay. It's just there. And then I'm just going to log it. And that's it. So that's what this function does. It basically either returns an IMDb URL or makes it and returns it. And there's a big mess when it has to make it on the fly. I'm thinking when you guys are refactoring, you can probably put this in a class and put all its helper methods in their own little classes or in the same class. That way it's a little more organized. Yeah. So yeah, all of that mess comes from this single function. Oh, you'll notice that this is at the very end of the function. And let me remember why it is there. Yes, I know you're a promise, okay? I want to know who you are. Ah, yes. So basically this asynchronous function calls in the body of the get database URL, we're calling get database IMDb URL, which is above here. So maybe when you guys are refactoring, move this so it's not here and instead right here, because I realized